This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. What the hell is going on? Mark, what the hell is going on?
Well, we are continuing to apply the fallout of the debate and what it means for the election going forward. And we've got a great guest today who's going to help us. Danley and I did our quick analysis last week, immediately following, but we now got to have a new guest. So now we're bringing in an expert to tell us where we're right, where we're wrong. We got Josh Kraushaar from the Jewish Insider, who's one of the best political analysts in the country. He's on Fox News with me all the time, and we all read his work. And he's going to tell us where the election's going from here.
Yeah, where the election is going from here. You know, you and I said it on our What the Hell Extra podcast, but, you know, I have much the same attitude as I had during the Iran-Iraq war, which is that I was really hopeful that they would both lose. But
I thought you were going to do the Henry Kissinger line, like, who are you rooting for in the Iran-Iraq war? And he said casualties. But in this case, the casualty would be America, Danny.
Yes, well, exactly. Unfortunately, I think that we lose no matter who wins at this point. But one of the things that I really wanted to press with Josh, and everybody knows that this is an area of special interest to me, is just this problem of Israel and the Democratic Party. Josh points out, more than once actually, Josh points out that at the Democratic National Convention, the word Israel was uttered once, right? Once, and it was by Kamala Harris, and it was not in a way that should warm everybody's hearts because, of course, it was accompanied by the inevitable "but." Israel, we support, but. And then, of course, at this most recent debate, we had the two moderators who actually quoted Hamas numbers of casualties without citing Hamas to Kamala Harris, who didn't correct them, to Donald Trump, who didn't correct either of them. This is just, I'm sort of left speechless by the gutlessness of our political and our media class.
Yeah. Well, not to defend the Democrats, because that's not what I want to do as a general
Words
matter.
Words you've never heard before on our podcast.
But I was in Chicago for the convention, and they did have a hostage family come out, and it was a very actually moving moment when the hostage family came out and talked about the hostages. So there was
wait a minute. Wait. First of all, the reason they had a hostage family is because they had hostage families at the Republican National Convention.
Sure.
And someone threw the gauntlet out and challenged them. On top of that, the family that they had at the Democratic National Convention was the mother and father of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Jewish Israeli-American hostage who was found murdered about 10 days ago along with 5 other Israelis. What did Kamala say about that during the debate? Nothing. What did the White House do about that? They issued an indictment of the leader of Hamas because that's apparently what it took, even though that's apparently been under seal for the last 8 months. These people don't give a damn about our hostages or about Israel.
I withdraw my comment, Danny. I was just stating that it wasn't the only time Israel was mentioned. There was that. And also, quite frankly, on the left, mentioning the hostages has been tied up with we have to stop this war. Right? You know, it's become a sympathetic way to say we need a peace deal. And we need to we need to give Hamas what it wants, which is a deal to allow it to preserve itself in exchange for the hostages. And so it's been politicized in that way. But look, I think one of the things that the Democrats don't seem to understand, and we get into this a little bit with Josh, is this is not just a Jewish issue. what's
Right.
happening, the left's embrace of these pro-Hamas protesters, because they're not just anti-Zionists, they're not just anti-Israel, they're anti-American. They're, when you saw when Netanyahu was speaking and they burned the American flag in front of Union Station, when you see on campuses them burning American flags and those great UNC frat boys who went and saved the American flag and got a rager thrown with them with our friend John Andrasik and other music stars coming to their frat house to put a party on for them. This is an issue that resonates beyond the Jewish community. As you know, I'm not Jewish. It resonates with me because I love the Jews, but also because I love America. And there's a lot of people out there who feel the same way and are not Jewish and are voting on this because they think this is an emblem of how far left the Democratic Party has become and out of the mainstream. And I think the Democrats, Josh mentions, I don't want to bogart too much of the interview, but he mentions, the fact that there's no sister soldier moment going on here like that. In the Democratic Party of old, Bill Clinton would have called these people out because he would have realized this is a way to attract the center. This is a way to win over people in the middle. He would have done it for purely political reasons because this is the smart political move to call out the extremists within his own party in order to win over the people away from the Republicans. And they don't seem to be able to do this because they're so afraid of the left. They're so afraid of a handful of voters in Dearborn, Michigan, when the voters in Dearborn, Michigan, they should be worried about are the UAW workers who don't like people who burn American flags, as well as people who try to mandate EVs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I agree with you. But all of this stuff got me thinking. The fact that we spend so much time on this podcast talking about not the issues, but about the problems created by loathsome individuals is really quite something in America today. As much as I despise, the fellow travelers and commies of yesteryear and the, Birchers and the wingnuts of yesteryear as well, they were never as central to American political discussions as they are today. I had a thought during our podcast, and I'm going to write this piece. We need a round of excommunications. Okay? we do. We just do. I'm not the Pope, and indeed, I do not follow the Pope, but I think we need to do that, and I think that's the right word. So maybe we'll talk about some of these issues and the debate. And
this
the
Pope would
election.
Excommunicate me, not the right people.
Right, that's true. The Pope would not.
But the principle of excommunication, I think, is a valid one that should be brought back into a political mainstream. I agree with you. We need to start excommunicating some people. 100%.
Exactly. Let's start.
Amen.
Amen. And with that, everybody knows Josh
And
Kraushaar.
the one person we don't want to excommunicate is Josh Kraushaar.
Josh has been with us any number of times, and it's because he's a great analyst. We love him. He is the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider and a political analyst for Fox News Radio. Previously a senior political correspondent at Axios, he was the editor-in-chief of what was the indispensable Daily Red Hotline and the co-author of the Almanac of American Politics.
Here's our interview. Well, Josh, welcome back to the podcast.
It's great to be back with you. It's a big moment in a busy week of politics.
Very, very true. So, give us your take on the debate. There's a lot of Republicans who are banging their heads into the wall right now. Are they right to be worried, or how did the debate affect the race?
Well, look, Kamala Harris did her homework. There was good reason for her to be holed up. We were trying to reach the campaign. We were trying to get comments on a number of important news stories, and we got a lot of feedback that she's holed up in Pittsburgh. She's practicing for the debate. She is a candidate who is always, as a prosecutor, she's better scripted. She's able to kind of have set pieces. You remember from the 2020 debate where she went after Biden and then she wasn't unable to follow up on attacks along those lines. But she certainly had some very memorable lines that went after Trump where it hurt him. I thought it was brilliant for her to attack or to mention his obsession with crowd sizes, and that got Trump all agitated, and it got him off his game. And there were a lot of psyops. It was almost like it was a good intel operation where she kind of got under his skin and got him off message and made him unable, or he's ultimately responsible, but ultimately she was able to deflect the attacks where she's most vulnerable, on the economy, on immigration, and on national security.
But, also all of those attacks were foreseeable. It's like he had to know that she was going to go after him on crowd size, or his team had to. Like, the answer on crowd size, if she was going to go after him on that, the answer is, how, first of all, don't you question my supporters. Did you see what happened? One of my supporters just died because someone tried to assassinate me at a campaign rally. How dare you speak ill of my supporters? I mean, there's just obvious pivots that you could, on every one of these things that you could have made. And instead, he just took the bait and just talked about what she wanted him to talk about. It was like one victory for her after another on that.
Well, Mark, the first question, she looked very nervous at the outset of the debate.
Yes.
And the first question was actually, for all the criticism of the ABC moderators, the first question was actually a tough one towards Harris, and basically asking her, how are you going to, claim credit for get points on the economy when people think it's so lousy? And she didn't answer the question. She totally avoided it. She looked nervous. And I was expecting Donald Trump to at least, have a little prep and to basically go in for the kill at the opening. And instead, he just was all over. I mean, he barely even focused on the economy. And then I think he pivoted to immigration and kind of got off message. And that was the tone that was sort of the symbolism of how the debate went for Donald Trump. He couldn't focus on any one point for more than 10 seconds. He got distracted. He didn't hit her where she's the most vulnerable, which again, her handling of the economy and her connection to President Biden, try to connect the two of them together. And immigration, I thought, when you bring up that ridiculous story, the made up story out of Springfield, Ohio, that was sort of self-discrediting, and it really hurt, I think, the campaign's effective messaging on immigration and national security. I'm sure we'll talk about this a little later, but just there were a lot of opportunities, even on the Middle East, which should be a slam dunk for Trump to really litigate that case, and he did not go there nearly as much as I expected. So, I mean, there was a debate of strong preparation for Harris, a moderate tone, not a whole lot of moderate policy, but a moderate tone that she showed during the convention, and Trump just whiffed at the many opportunities that he had.
Exactly. I mean, when you say he didn't go there, I mean, he barely went anywhere. And that was the problem. And I think, look, Mark and I have talked about this. Obviously, you've written very well about it. I thought Nate Silver did a good after action sort of, will it matter? Maybe not, but damn, just a story of missed opportunities. One of the things that I was really surprised by was the lack of foreign policy / national security stuff in the debate. And there we can certainly fault the moderators. But again, we could also fault Donald Trump for not taking this back to Kamala with all of the dissatisfaction about support for Israel, whether support for Ukraine, inaction on China, inaction on defense. I mean, I think she's made some really serious missteps on Israel, but maybe I'm just completely loopy, and the Jewish and pro-Israel community thinks she's awesome because she's a Democrat. What do you think?
So first off, the moderators, shame on the moderators for accepting Hamas talking points on the number of civilians killed during the, that without even attribution. I mean, that was the tone of the lack of seriousness of the questioning on foreign. So I agree with you. I mean, there was a lot more opportunity to go deep on foreign policy, and it may have helped Harris actually the way things were going. But the moderators, I don't think, really spend as much time and did their research as much as they should have. As far as the candidates, I mean, look, Harris echoed everything she said at the convention. If you liked what Harris said on foreign policy at the convention, and I will say, no speaker other than Harris mentioned Israel. Harris was the one who mentioned Israel. They avoided Israel like the plague at the Democratic convention, and I was expecting her to do the same at her speech, but she did express support for Israel's security. She did mention, in her convention speech, she mentioned Iran, and she sort of did the bare minimum, to satisfy the sizable pro-Israel constituency within the Democratic Party. So she kind of repeated those talking points verbatim at the debate, which I think is going to just do enough to kind of keep the people who are disillusioned with Biden and Harris, and then the fact that they can't speak out more vociferously against Hamas and put the blame where it lies. I mean, I think a lot of Jewish voters that are moderate on the fence, waiting to hear that kind of strong language, they're not going to get it. But they're getting more than maybe their low expectations were last month. And Donald Trump, he's repeated these lines about Israel that I don't think are all that effective. He said, Harris hates Israel and the Jewish state won't exist in 2 years, which I don't think helps win any Jewish voters on the fence that care about Israel. And he's also been saying, if I was president, he's been saying this about every foreign policy conflict. If I was president, you wouldn't have, October 7th. And then that's been something he's been saying nonstop for the last number of months. He didn't talk a whole lot about Iran. I think he mentioned them, but his sanctions worked and caused them to go broke. But there wasn't much meat on the bones, and you heard the same well-worn lines and attacks from Donald Trump. And I don't think that's going to reassure the voters who don't really want to vote Republican. They don't like the way the Biden administration and Harris have been handling the Middle East portfolio, but I don't think Trump is making the sale.
Right. And of course, when we talk about this, I realize that, it's mainly elites who care about foreign policy. But in certain places, of course, the Jewish vote is going to matter, Pennsylvania. And I want to talk more about that in a second. But I want to ask you a different, just follow-up quick question on the language that Kamala Harris has been using about Israel. I wrote a little Substack piece about that, and we'll link it in our transcript. But I basically said, committed to Israel's defense is a smokescreen, okay? Because everybody knows that they're going to decide what Israel's defense means and what defense at all means. And it's surprising to me that people haven't cottoned on to the fact that that's a head fake, right? They're not committed to Israel's defense insofar as Israel judges it necessary, only insofar as they and their politics judge it necessary.
Well, that's true. And also, like, the thing that I just can't get over when you listen to the rhetoric coming from the administration and from the Harris campaign is that they don't seem to fundamentally recognize that Iran is the problem. And I actually, again, was surprised she mentioned Iran during her convention speech. I don't think she did at the debate. But there's such a sort of moral equivalence that you hear. On one hand, Israel has a right to defend itself and do what it can to defeat terrorism. But on the other hand, boy, there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And boy, that Israel is not, Bibi Netanyahu's horrible and that's so bad. And you lose the plot. You lose the plot that Hamas is responsible for the terrorism and for what happened on October 7th and the regional mess. And you lose the plot that Iran is behind all the tentacles that are trying to threaten Israel. So that's what you don't get from Harris. Again, I thought she did the bare minimum to at least politically signal that she will defend Israel and she's a supporter of Israel. And she seemed, and I will say, like, unlike Biden, she did seem to have kind of her heart in the right place. Like, Biden, especially in the tail end of his administration, doesn't even seem to be coherent when he's talking about these issues. In fact, at the convention, he was the one who said the protesters that are these, anti-Israel Hamas sign-wielding protesters in some of these campuses, they have a point. And that was something that a lot of Democrats were surprised that he ad-libbed that line. I mean, she's been much more, at least comfortable talking about her talking points. She just doesn't want to go beyond and have a more substantive conversation about really the threats that Israel faces.
Well, she said that they're expressing the right emotions or something to that effect as well. So she's done the same thing. I don't understand why Trump didn't wrap that around her axle when she brought up Charlottesville. So she's attacking him with a lie about Charlottesville, saying that there were good people on both sides, that he was defending the neo-Nazis, which has been debunked by Jake Tapper on CNN. And why didn't he turn around and say, there are people marching on campuses say from the river to the sea, and you said, and your boss Joe Biden said they have a good point, and you said they're expressing the right emotions. Like,
Mark, that's such an important point, because I tend to think just in the broader, not about like the Jewish vote, but just the general politics. I actually don't think most, as Donnie was saying, I don't think many voters are following the intricacies of foreign policy. I do think when they see the images of people burning American flags, of people shouting terrorist slogans, of people in keffiyehs and masks, looking like they're going to threaten other Americans on our campuses and in our cities, that strikes a chord with a whole lot of voters. That's the kind of imagery that really feels like it shows an administration that is indulging disorder, a little larger, and it symbolizes the chaos we're seeing internationally. So I agree with you. I mean, I think these are missed opportunities from Trump. I mean, that is a message I think he could be hitting a lot harder, and instead he has not taken that opportunity.
And the same on Ukraine. So she said, she had the gall to say, if Donald Trump were president, Vladimir Putin would be in Kyiv right now. He should have turned around and said, I'm sorry, I'm the only president in the 21st century that Vladimir Putin hasn't invaded another country under. He invaded under Bush, he invaded under Obama and Biden, and he invaded under you. I'm the only one he didn't invade under. I'm just...
Well, Mark, it's worse because he also, when given the opportunity, didn't say he wanted Ukraine to win the war, which I think is... And we can talk more about... We've been reporting about sort of the the Tucker influence on this small faction of the Republican Party. But I mean, that is what the advice that Donald Trump is getting. I mean, the Laura Loomer, this extreme fringe character,
Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz were on the flight. I mean, we were watching them get off the plane in Philadelphia. They were on the flight giving Trump pre-debate advice. These are not the H.R. McMaster. I mean, these are not the serious conservatives that had Trump's ear through much of his first term.
No, these are not. These are fringe is really a nice word. These people are cranks, and that is the problem. I had wanted to move on to something else, but now that you mentioned Tucker, this is something that has really, really been sticking in my craw because, of course, I blame Tucker, who reportedly was instrumental, along with Don Jr., in forcing J.D. Vance to the top of the vice presidential sweepstakes, despite the fact that I think Donald Trump's own instincts were much better. And the person he wanted was much better. But he ends up with this, bombastic isolationist chameleon who you can't trust as far as you can throw him. But that I haven't gotten through any day without ranting about J.D. Vance.
Is that all? We could probably do a whole show on that.
We probably could. But what I wanted to ask you about was this Tucker Carlson interview. So, I've known Tucker since he was a kid in the bow ties that he used to like to affect even before he was 18. And of course, his dad was a very serious part of the Reagan administration and counter-Soviets and really sort of, understood who bad guys were and certainly would have had no illusions about the Holocaust. And yet, Tucker Carlson has platformed, has given space, and not disagreed with this Holocaust denier named Daryl Cooper, a self-proclaimed historian, who says that it was Churchill's fault that the war happened and that Hitler knew how to deal with the Jewish problem. These are almost exact quotes. There are 98 questions here. Is this simply just a sort of a niche issue that Danny Pletka and, a whole bunch of elite Jews and sympathizers know about and it won't hurt him at all? Or is this something that Donald Trump should actually deal with, in your opinion?
Well, if that's the case, it's a scary proposition that Holocaust denial isn't politically discrediting in the year 2024, right? I mean, that 10 years ago, that would be the end of someone, even someone who was indirectly connected to something like that. It tells you a lot about how people get their news, about how ignorant, frankly, a younger generation of Americans are, that this has not, I actually was having some conversations off record with media colleagues, and it was telling that even, I'll put it this way, the Harris campaign, they were only talking to Jewish reporters to pitch the story, not the larger, broader sense of reporters who I think when I was starting out covering politics, this would have been a 10 out of 10 scandal where you have, someone who in Tucker Carlson isn't just a conservative talk show host, but like you said, he was instrumental in helping Trump boost or pick Vance as his running mate and is hosting Vance at a big rally in Pennsylvania later this month, and I think the bigger news is that we've talked to the Vance operation. They are making this about cancel culture, even though they condemn the crank, not a historian, he's some crank podcaster, right? But they're saying this, they're framing this as about cancel culture, which is absurd. And they're also not canceling an event with Tucker, so they're willing and eager to associate themselves with him, even though he has as you said, platforms some of the most vile and bigoted views. Holocaust denial used to be just so out of the mainstream, it would be considered, a career ender to anyone who kind of engaged in this stuff, right?
A third rail, absolutely.
So, like we were talking about, the biggest difference between Trump's first campaign and his administration and now is that the people in his circle, you now have Tucker and Don Jr. and people who hold isolationist and frankly cranky type views. You even saw J.D. Vance defending this urban legend that something that happened in his home state of Ohio that didn't happen about cat. I didn't even follow I was at the Meade conference. I was doing other things and not on social media. And then I all of a sudden saw this kind of nutty story that Vance campaign was actually kind of indulging. And you saw Trump mention it himself at the debate. So this is the new world of social media and people don't care about whether the facts are right. And a lot of these extreme, crazy views have become treated just as another point of view rather than just the extremism that it is.
On Tucker, God bless Rupert Murdoch for getting rid of him. That was probably one of the most important decisions by a conservative media executive since Bill Buckley communicated the John Birch Society from National Review in the day. So thank you to the Murdochs for doing that. On what is JD's obsession with cats? First, it's like the childless cat ladies are the problem in America. Then you got the Haitian immigrants eating cats. He seems to be cat obsessed.
He just seems drawn to these like online fringe figures. There was a story that didn't get a whole lot of attention a few weeks ago, but another actual right-wing Holocaust denying type of social media character. JD was texting as a senator, was texting with this guy and said all kinds of things that were very kind of strange. And this guy leaked all these text conversations to the Washington Post, right? So not only was he a crank and a weirdo, but he wasn't a friend. He was not anyone who you should be texting as a U.S. senator. And again, this is a guy, Charles Johnson, who's trafficked in Holocaust denial and all kinds of crazy, and he's actually apparently is a supporter of Kamala Harris, according to the story that came out. So J.D. Vance seems to be drawn to these fringe. This is why, part of picking our good running mate is first do no harm. Like, you don't want your running mate to be the story. Trump actually threw J.D. Vance under the bus at the debate, not on this issue, but on a comment he made about whether he would veto a federal abortion legislation. But Vance has been a problem. He's been a headache for the Trump campaign. He's not helping Trump win any of these key states that are so necessary for Republicans to win back the presidency and also win the battles for Congress.
Right. I know. And, Mark, as you were saying that about Rupert Murdoch, I was exactly thinking about not just Bill Buckley's excommunication of the John Birch Society, but Bill Buckley's excommunication of somebody who had been his friend, Pat Buchanan, who similarly was a Holocaust denier. And, these people are they tread around the edges of Holocaust denial. Pat Buchanan himself said he just didn't understand how technically they could have killed that many people at Treblinka, given the tools they were using. It was sort of, some sort of pseudo-scientific, thoughtful way to go about these things. And the problem for us right now, as, pretty traditional conservatives, is that there is no Bill Buckley to stand up. And I love Rich Lowry, who's the editor-in-chief of National Review, but I think that he doesn't, unfortunately, carry the weight in this much, much larger media environment that in those days was much smaller and different that Bill did.
Because back then, National Review was it. If you wanted to be a mainstream conservative, you had to publish in National Review, or you were cranking out a leaflet on a mimeograph and sending it by direct mail to people. It was that. Now, thanks to the explosion of social media, anybody who has a crazy idea can platform themselves and attract lots of viewers outside of the mainstream. And that's good in some ways because, it used to be ABC was our only source of information, right? And CBS and NBC. And so we've now got Fox News. We've now got other alternatives. But at the same time, it's also empowered cranks who would have been, sitting in their basement with their mimeograph machine 30, 40 years ago. I'm exposing my age because most of our listeners probably don't know what a mimeograph machine is. But I remember in school, whenever you got a test, take a deep smell of the mimeograph.
I'm not quite as old. I don't remember the mimeograph, but I do remember when I was starting out in political journalism. It was the age of the blog, and you actually had to write a complete paragraph.
Oh, you're so young.
Had to actually be coherent, right? And now we're in the age of the meme. We're actually going back to symbols instead of words mattering in terms of persuading people. It's just all about gut, and it's not about literacy and knowledge. And I find this you talk to people that are trying to figure out where the media is headed, and they're like, well, we're trying to dumb everything down. People have a 10-second attention span, and that's how these crazy ideas get kind of percolating into the ecosystem.
That's exactly right. So let's come to the question that I had wanted to ask you before. Traditionally speaking in America, and we've talked about this with you on the podcast before, traditionally speaking in America, the Jewish community, while it represents probably between 2 and 3% of Americans overall, is quite influential and disproportionately influential in a number of swing states. I saw that the Republican Jewish Coalition, something that wouldn't have existed 30 years ago, by the way, launched a $10 million ad buy in Nevada and in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Arizona to attract Jewish voters to Donald Trump. At the same time, we recognize that, as you say, Kamala Harris has sort of been, let's just say, doing the least necessary to ensure that she does not alienate the community. Plus, of course, she totes around her husband, if I were really mean, I would call him her court Jew, but I suppose that would be too mean for those of you who know that expression. So tell me, where's the Jewish community going to go at this point? Is this not as large as people make it out to be, but nonetheless substantial pro-Hamas contingent inside the Democratic Party actually important? Is the White House's kowtowing to them actually going to hurt them? 16 questions in there. Answer whichever one you want.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a huge moment. And anyone who's followed sort of the opinion in the Jewish community since October 7th knows that Democrats, liberal Democrats, have had this crisis moment where all of their supposed, if you're on the left, these supposed allies have been indulging and even engaging in anti-Semitism. And a lot of people who weren't following the issues that we cover and talk about so much were shocked that you have in academia and in the arts and in media an indulgence of just radical left and at times anti-Semitic views that have literally like made liberal Jews uncomfortable in their workplaces and certainly among one-time political allies. So it's been a crisis moment. We've seen, obviously, the faction of the Squad and the fact that the Democratic Party has indulged this constituency rather than confronting them. So that's been a real wake-up call. The problem, I think, in terms of expecting a lot of movement towards the Republicans is that Donald Trump is sort of the elephant in the room. And I think if there hasn't been polling on this that I've seen, but if Nikki Haley or other Republicans that were running or were the nominee, I think the Jewish vote would be more Republican than at least any election since Ronald Reagan, if it was anyone other than Donald Trump. Trump, for obvious reasons, like there's sort of a ceiling. Despite that ceiling, though, like a lot of the reputable polling, at the very least, shows him winning 25-30% of the Jewish vote, which would be about the same as in 2020. There's some really high quality polls that have just come out, one by a group that the Orthodox Union, one of the Jewish denominations, has been involved with. And there's another poll from Pew Research that shows a subsample of Jewish voters showing that Harris is only at 65% or so with the Jewish vote. The other poll is actually of Pennsylvania and New York swing voters, which also shows a lot of movement towards Republicans in those key congressional races in the key state of Pennsylvania. So I do think Republicans are going to have something of a high watermark because of the Democratic Party's problems condemning anti-Semitism, speaking out against some of the most ridiculous, ideologically extreme elements of their party, and just the fact that it's such a salient issue. Again, it's not just about Israel. It's about, you have literally liberal Jewish students on college campuses that are being threatened and harassed, and no one's doing anything about it. And the Democratic Party, one of the things we've been reporting on at Jewish Insider is that it's stunning that the Senate Democrats have not, under Chuck Schumer's leadership, haven't held a single hearing about what's going on. Because
no kidding.
The Democratic Party is, they're the party of the teachers unions and academia, and they don't want to confront their base. And that's something that a lot of liberal Jews have been awoken to. So there is like an awakening, but because of Trump, it just has limited the gains that the GOP has been able to make.
And Schumer hasn't brought up the Anti-Semitism Act, which is a bipartisan piece of legislation introduced and passed pretty overwhelmingly in the House, and he refuses to bring it up. I mean, to me, this is just revolting. I just wanted to follow up with another little bit of revolting. I've known Alyssa Slotkin for a while, and I saw reporting that she is apparently, because she's in Michigan, because she's got a pretty competitive race for re-election, is running ads targeted at pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people, and using a tool inside Facebook to shield those ads from Jewish voters. That's so gross. Give me thoughts about this.
Well, this is the Democratic Party, instead of having a sister soldier moment on anti-Semitism to speak out against these. And by the way, it's a small fact. This is not like a huge part of their party. And they're more afraid of like loud voices online. It's kind of like the mirror image of the Tucker issue for the right. I mean, they're afraid of a small, crazy faction on their far left, and they want to keep them in the tent. They don't want to push them out of the tent because they think if they lose some votes in Dearborn, maybe in Ann Arbor, then that could cost them the Senate, it could cost them the presidency, and they don't want to take that risk. So instead of doing the morally right thing. And frankly, I think, well, in my view, it actually would be politically beneficial. But Bill Clinton earned a whole lot of credibility in 92 when he spoke out against Sister Soljan in front of Jesse Jackson. And that was one of the big moments for Bill Clinton's campaign. Likewise, Josh Shapiro has been getting huge credibility points. And I think it was a missed opportunity for Harris to pick him as her running mate. But he's been, if you look at his job approval in Pennsylvania, it's in the 60s. And because he calls out at times, maybe less lately, but he has been known for calling out the extreme elements on the far left, he has gotten points from Republicans and independents in his home state. So I think it's cowardice on the party's part, but that's their calculation. And you see in Michigan, they want to make sure they keep enough of the Arab vote and the anti-Israel Arab vote in Dearborn in the fold, but they also need to get Jewish supporters in Michigan and Pennsylvania and a whole lot of other states. So they're just trying to thread this needle and kind of trying to just get by till November.
I would quibble a little bit with the idea that it's just a small faction, because there's the squad. Republicans don't have anybody quite like this in their faction, and they got rid of when Steve King said, what's wrong with white supremacy, they kicked him off of his committees and drove him out of the Republican caucus. You got Tim Walz saying, "I'm just so happy when I think that Ilhan Omar is in the United States Congress." These are virulent anti-Semites in their ranks that they tolerate and put up with. But the other thing that I think they make a mistake on is this isn't just a Jewish vote issue. You're looking at auto workers, blue-collar workers in Michigan who are defecting from them. Part of that is because of the EV mandates and what they're doing to auto jobs. But they also look and see these people are in league with these people who are burning American flags on college campuses. These elites burning the American flag. Auto workers don't like burning American flags. They're patriots, and they see them associated with that. I'm not Jewish, but this is like one of my top issues. There's lots of people out there who are not Jewish who are standing up for Jewish students, who are because these protesters aren't just anti-Jewish. They're not anti-Zionist. They're not just pro-terrorists. They hate America. They're anti-West. They're anti-American. And it's a bigger problem than just the Jewish vote.
I totally agree. I will say, not to defend the Democrats too much, but they did defeat, of the 3 lawmakers in Congress that lost, 2 of them were squad members that lost in closed Democratic primaries.
But with a huge spend from AIPAC.
Correct. Look, I wish there were more groups. I've written about this, that AIPAC is one of the few super PACs, if you will, that is actually spending for normal, sane candidates in a lot of these races on both sides. And you hear this left-wing rhetoric that the reality is that they, on both sides, they've actually, in a lot of other races where people aren't paying as much attention, they've actually, on both sides, endorsed and backed more mainstream, moderate, non-Holocaust denying candidates. Jamal Bowman, who lost, was on a panel with a Holocaust, Norman Finkelstein, cranky. This is a bipartisan phenomenon. But I will say that it's, there's hope in that you did see, it's hard to beat an incumbent even with a lot of money, and you did see 2 out of the 7 squad members go down to defeat in Democratic primaries.
There's a Holocaust denier named Finkelstein.
Yeah. Yes, Mark. Norman Finkelstein is a well-known and particularly dreadful sort of Chomskyite Holocaust denier.
Just caught me off guard. I didn't know
that. Man, and that's, it's funny because he was Bowman. This is how deep the fever swamps, some of these folks reside. But he same thing. He's on a podcast. He thinks he's like the greatest says all these things that he thinks is actual history, and it's full of garbage. And he appears with him at a public event, and it caused him a whole lot of political trouble.
Wow.
Yay, it caused it a whole lot of political trouble. That's the kind of political trouble I love. You mentioned Josh Shapiro, and I like Josh Shapiro a lot. I want to, even though this is water under the bridge, I still want to ask you, why didn't Kamala pick him?
Kamala Harris is a very cautious politician. I'll give you the kind of the broad political takeaways, and then there's also the more disturbing ones. The reality is that just like Democrats don't want to confront the squad and the extreme wing on their far left, they didn't want to have an eruption at the convention. They didn't want to pick someone who was the best political athlete on the board. She needs to win the state of Pennsylvania. He's someone who's won moderates, who can rebrand her and help move her more to the middle. It was someone, and by the way, this whole nonsense that there wasn't chemistry between the two of them, or that he's too ambitious, which seems like a code word for other things. The reality is, most good self-confident candidates for running for president, you pick the best talent on the board. Bill Clinton picked Al Gore, who had run for president 4 years earlier. because that was the best pick at the time on the board. Trump wasn't in love with Mike Pence, but that was what he needed politically. So most good politicians pick the best person, not the person who you're most friendly with. I think they thought Walz too, had maybe more blue collar appeal. It's not showing. I mean, Walz's record is, and we've been writing and I've been talking about this for weeks now, but Walz's record is very progressive. I mean, people don't realize that behind the very folksy style is a lot of blue state progressivism in Minnesota. So that's coming out now, and it's become a little bit of a political problem lately. So Shapiro was definitely the best talent on the board that she passed up. Now, I think the more worrisome part of it is that you had a lot of extreme voices, again, all online, all from really radical people who were raising these, obscene insinuations and about his Jewishness, about his views on Israel, which were entirely in the mainstream. In fact, it was a college column he wrote, which was, I think, ahead of its time in terms of arguing the case of why the Palestinians were not reliable partners for peace. But these were used as oppo and riled up the far left of the party. And I think that did play a role in Chicago. The Democrats Harris did not want to have a scene in Chicago. She wanted to kind of just get through Chicago and rebrand herself and not have to deal with this issue at all. And it was until Kamala Harris mentioned Israel in the final night, not a single Democrat gave a positive defense of Israel at the convention. I mean, to me, that says it all. And that's why Josh Shapiro was a big factor in her not picking Josh Shapiro.
Gross.
Yeah. Well, if the Democrats lose and they're smart, a great ticket for the Democrats in 2028 would be Shapiro and Richie Torres.
Here's my current crush.
It's like he's a black, gay, pro-Jewish legislator. It checks all their identity politics boxes, and he's a great guy on top of everything else. But I don't know that the Democratic Party of today would ever nominate a Shapiro-Torres ticket.
Well, it tells you a whole lot. I mean, and I agree with everything you said about Congressman Torres. He's a rising star in the party, but because of that obsession against Israel, you would think that this would be like the number one prospect. Everyone would be talking about it, and the influence of the far left you can see in the Democratic Party conversation. So, look, I would keep a close eye on Torres though, because I think there's a governor's race coming up in New York, and the Senate seat of Senator Jill. There are going to be races that open up, and I think the Democratic Party is fighting for their very soul. And I think he has been one of the leading and most articulate voices against the socialism, all this radicalism that's taking place in his home state.
And I don't think he had a Chinese communist spy working for him either, so that might help him in the governor's race.
God knows. So, exit question from me, Josh. Let's get back to the big political picture. Rui Teixeira had an interesting piece on the Liberal Patriot Substack this morning explaining that, Kamala had a great debate, but she is still significantly underwater with non-college educated whites, with certain minorities, that on the economy, people still rate Trump better than her, although she's made some improvements, and that without these folks, it's going to be hard for her to win. So give us your sort of snapshot post-debate, and I realize this is, going to be, it's your personal view, but you're a seasoned political observer, and you talk to a lot of people. What's your gut about how it's going to go right now?
Well, Roy pinpointed the very vulnerability that Harris has, and it's going to remain even though she had a good debate performance, and it wasn't just white working class. I read Roy's column this morning. It was overall working class voters of all backgrounds and ethnicities. I think the number, it was based on the New York Times poll that came out over the weekend, but it found that she's doing, I think, worse than even Biden was when he was at a low point among working class voters before he dropped out of the race. So her numbers are just as bad as Biden's. I think maybe even slightly worse if I read the data correctly, and they're far, far worse than where Biden was in 2020. So I mean, this is her problem is working class Black and Hispanic voters. The polls, even after her sugar high, show that about 15% or so of Black voters will vote for Donald Trump, which sounds like a low number, but compared to how Biden did in 2020 and the historical numbers for Democrats, that is actually quite good. That could actually make the difference in Georgia and Pennsylvania and all these swing states that we've been talking about. And working class Hispanic voters, that is, especially men, there's a big problem. And that also is relevant in Arizona and Nevada. That's why Nevada, which is a state that hasn't voted Republican, I don't think since 2004, is neck and neck, because the people who work at the casinos, the union workers lean Democrat, but there's a lot of inroads Republicans have made among those blue collar workers, blue collar Hispanics in a state like Nevada. And that state may actually end up deciding, if it's as close as it looks, that could be a state that decides the election. So yeah, people talk about working class whites, but the thing I took away from Rory's column is that it's actually working class black voters and working class Hispanic voters that are going to play a decisive role in this race.
So my exit question is this. So New York Times Siena poll, 91% of voters want change, including 61% who want major change. Do you agree that this is a change election? Because all elections are either change or continuity elections in one way or another. And Harris is trying to seize the mantle of change. Her campaign slogan is a new way forward, which is pretty audacious for a sitting vice president of one of the most unpopular presidents in the history of polling. She's trying to flip the script and make Trump the incumbent and her the challenger. It doesn't seem to be working according to the New York Times numbers, in that most people see him as an agent of change and her as an agent of the status quo. But one, do you agree it's a change election? And two, do you think that Harris can seize the mantle of change enough to pull it off?
Not only do I think this is a change election, but I think almost every election since 2004 has been a change election. I mean, we're in a phase of like one-term presidents, so there's been a lot more fluidity in the election. People are just perennially upset about everything, even when things are good based on like the macroeconomic data, and people are generally like have reason to be a little more optimistic. There's been sort of since Katrina, since 2005, basically since I've been covering politics, you look at the right track, wrong track, you look at all these important metrics, and the public just wants to throw the bums out on a regular basis. Now, the one exception to that rule, when you look at the last couple decades of political history, is 2012. That was when Obama won a second term, despite a pretty bad economy and despite, a lot of concerns about his own record on policy from a lot of voters. And how did Obama win, and how did he defeat Mitt Romney? Well, it's a long question, but the big reason is he discredited his opponent. He made him out to be just like the worst. It was a very, very nasty campaign where someone like Romney was turned into this plutocratic villain. That's the Harris playbook in 2024. They know that they can't win on the Biden record. They're in this awkward position of trying to be the candidate of change while she's the vice president that is responsible. She claimed credit at the debate, by the way, for the withdrawal in Afghanistan, which I thought was an interesting moment. I didn't think
another
it was
lost
good for her
opportunity
politically. But yeah, right. But she needs the discredit. I mean, the whole goal for Harris is to continue the anti-Trump coalition of 2020 and to make Trump the epitome of evil, and not just on the democracy stuff, but on the economy and abortion. Like, those are the two. On abortion, it's obvious that was one of her stronger moments at the debate. But on the economy, she's trying to paint him as someone just like they did with Romney, as someone who's interested in the billionaire class, but not the average American. And that's what she's trying to do, to paint herself as the candidate of change. It's not going to be easy, but Donald Trump makes it a lot easier for her.
He sure does help. Hey, I have one P.S. exit question, which we just never talked. Well, something I realized, Mark and I have not talked about this at all in any of the political pods that we've done with any of the really smart people we've had. Kamala Harris is a woman. I'm not saying that with surprise, but people don't really talk about the gender effect. And she
didn't talk about it at all in the convention.
Right. Do you think that, I don't want to say, is America ready for a woman president, because that just sounds stupid.
But is America ready for a woman president?
but is Kamala Harris that woman? I do think I think actually a lot of women secretly don't like other women. Having gone to a women's college, I know that. But also, I wonder whether that's a factor. What do you think?
Well, it is very interesting that she is not leaning into her, the potential history-making nature of her candidacy. Hillary's slogan was "I'm with her," right?
I know.
It was all in your face, and she was not. I mean, not like. I mean, it was a very bad, strategy. Harris has, not just on gender, but on race. Like, she is not. I mean, Trump tried to bring it up at that National Association of Black Journalists Forum, but she has not leaned into that part of her candidacy. Now, she did, I thought it was interesting on the racial front. She did, after avoiding it during the CNN interview, she did lean into Trump, attacking him for being these racist episodes in his career. So I think she realizes that she needs to do a little bit of that. She still needs to get a little more juice from the base, a little more excitement, especially among African-American voters. But on the gender front, there's a huge gender gap. We've always seen a sizable gender gap, I think, since the days of Reagan. That's nothing new. But what's new is just the size of it. And it just gets bigger and bigger, it seems, on a regular basis. And Taylor Swift's endorsement right after the debate, I think it's the young unmarried women sector of the electorate that is
cat ladies.
Which is why, the overwhelmingly Democratic. It's become overwhelming. I mean, it's like 80%, right, Democratic, which is what is the Democratic Party base in 2024, and that's why Kamala Harris has, that's why her messaging has been the way it is.
Interesting, super interesting. Josh, you're always awesome. Thank you so much for everything you do. Your newsletter is one of the few I read every single day. So thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, and it's great being on once again with you guys.
Take care.
Okay.
Thanks. So, look, I think my theory of the case is, as bad as the debate was, this is a change election, and the fundamentals are still in Trump's favor. That New York Times poll, 6 in 10 people see him as an agent of change. Only 3 in 10 see Kamala Harris as an agent of change. She's trying to become the agent of change by, just separating herself from Biden, but it just doesn't work. You can't be the sitting vice president of the current administration and be the agent of change. And also, 49%, a plurality, almost a near majority, say that Donald Trump is moderate. They see him as not too far right, not too far left. 47% think Kamala Harris is too far left. So she's by most Americans consider her to be the extreme. Trump is the moderate. She's a candidate of the status quo. Trump is a candidate of change. If that holds, it's his election to lose.
Well, it may be his election to lose, but Mark, my biggest concern is not that. My biggest concern is...
It should be.
Well, it's not. My biggest concern is that I don't know which Donald Trump I'm voting for. I got to say, the presence of Matt Gaetz at his debate practice, it didn't just show in his debate. It also showed, in the sense that he was unbelievably ill-prepared. He was completely conspiracy-minded. And so, from my standpoint, again, we are just, we're in a very, very risky place. And I don't know what Donald Trump is going to represent as our president if he actually wins the election. I worry what Kamala Harris is going to represent, so I understand that he may represent...
what she's going to represent.
Well, my fear is my fear, Mark, is that he is going to represent the kind of change that I don't want. That he actually isn't going to be the person who he was in the first 4 years, and that he's going to be more a Tucker Carlsonite and a J.D. Vanceite than he is going to be the kind of person who hires pretty serious people.
Well, I'm going down to Mar-a-Lago to interview him, so I will ask him that.
Yes, ask him that question and tell him Danny is very worried.
Yep.
I know that's going to be what makes all the difference.
Danny wants to know which Donald Trump she's voting for.
Well, but that's actually, when you talk about it, that's not a dumb question, right?
Yeah.
Which Donald Trump am I voting for? Who are you? Are you that guy? Because,
are you the guy who whacked Qasem Soleimani and bombed Syria twice and destroyed the ISIS caliphate? Or are you the guy who, like Matt Gaetz and J.D. Vance, says, I don't care about Ukraine and, we're just got to withdraw from the world?
Exactly.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Good. Ask him that question.
I will.
Okay, folks, tune in. Next time we see each other, Mark will have talked to President Trump, and hopefully he's going to give us a little smidgen of insight before he writes his column about it to understand what it was that the president said to him, because I, for one, want to know the answer to these questions. Take care.
Excellent. All right, take care. See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm @dpletka.
And I'm @Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.